What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be doing another episode of Battlefront 2 Mythbusters, this time focusing on the newest additions to the game in BB-8 and BB-9E. Now, most of these tests are actually just on BB-8, as after testing both of them I found that the duplicate tests were identical, so pretty much all of these can be applied to both of the droids, other than obviously just any focusing on their abilities or facing certain heroes. Before we get into it, if you guys do enjoy this Mythbusters series, then make sure to smash that like button down below. I actually have a really big episode of Mythbusters planned in the next month or so, focusing on the minimap, which is going to take a whole lot of work. So like I said, if you do enjoy this series, then make sure to leave a like down below to help support the channel. And if you are new, then make sure to subscribe with those notifications on. But anyway, without wasting any more time, we are going to jump straight into it, and starting off, I just wanted to test the BB droid's base attack. For those who don't know, their regular attack can actually be triggered with both the normal attack button and the ADS button as well, similar to Palpatine's lightning. So the first thing I tested was actually just whether or not it deals more damage if it do hold both triggers at once. So this first test was just with one trigger, and as you can see, it took this heavy out in 4.40 seconds. This next test was then with both triggers, and surprisingly this did actually lower it to 4.21 seconds, which is strange because it's really not enough of a difference to be worth it, yet it is still a difference nonetheless. I tested this multiple times over, and I actually double and triple checked the timing of those timers on screen, going frame by frame, and the results kept coming back the same. So I guess it does make a difference, but it's only about a third of a second difference over a 4-second period, so I'm not too sure why the difference is so small. Now, next up I wanted to test the extra damage on BB-8's left ability, as the description mentions that when the ability is active it'll deal more damage, so I just wanted to see how big or small of a difference it made. Without the ability being active, I tapped the trigger once and it dealt 29 damage with that regular attack. I then tried with the ability active again, just tapping it once, and it dealt 30 damage this time, only a 1 damage difference. Just like the first test, I'm not really sure why that difference was so small. It almost hardly seems worth it in my opinion, but at the end of the day, that is what the results say. Next up, I simply wanted to test how much damage the cable spin ability dealt per actual hit, as well as how fast it hit in terms of how many times it hits you per second. For the first test, as you can see, it deals 45 damage on that single hit, and then for the second test, you'll have to just trust me, as it's really hard to figure out how to show this on screen without boring you guys, but it will actually hit the enemy 3 times per second, which is much higher than I thought. Next up, I then just tested the same ability with that scanner ability active to see how much extra damage it dealt, and this one went from 45 damage per hit to 47 damage per hit, so again, a very small change, but I guess with this ability, a small change can actually be pretty devastating. Moving on, I then tested the rolling charge without the scanner ability being active, and it dealt a nice even 200 damage. Then testing it with the scanner ability active, it deals 209 damage, which is a pretty big jump I guess when you compare it to the other results, although the ratio is pretty much the same, and overall it doesn't really affect the ability too much at all. Next up, I tested whether or not you can actually dodge that cable spin ability. So as you can see, you can actually dodge it, however with how fast it spins, you'll still get hit with it straight after you stand up, depending of course on where you are. So rolling can be helpful, but at the same time don't expect it to be a lifesaver. Now next up, I then wanted to test the droid's jump height from a standstill compared to when they're at a full sprint, as the sprint did seem a little bit lower from my own playtime. The first test from the standstill shows BB-8 can make it pretty much to that circle on the first order emblem behind him. From a sprint though, you can see that the jump is actually a fair bit shorter, so my initial theory was actually correct. I then tried it on the move but without a sprint, and as you can see, the jump is much higher than when he is sprinting, almost the same height as the initial jump, and so I guess that's a good tip right there, that if you want to jump over something a little bit higher, it might be best to actually stop the sprint before you do. Next up, I just wanted to quickly test some of the shields, starting off with the heavy shield. So as you can see, he does deal damage right through the shield, which is to be expected. I then tried on the squad shield from the officer class as well, and again the results were exactly the same. For those that have watched my shield episode of the Mythbusters series, you'll know that there wasn't much point testing the rest of the shield, since they essentially all share the same outcome. Next up, again for the officer class, I just wanted to test the disruption ability to see if it would cancel or overheat his base attack, since technically he can overheat it normally, but as you can see it didn't overheat it at all, which is actually a little bit surprising, although I guess it isn't the same as a blaster in terms of the overheating. Next was a pretty obvious one, but I wanted to show it anyway, and that is that Vader can choke BB-8, which also pretty much confirms that in general he can just be ragdolled like the rest of the characters in the game, and not so much like the droidicas. I did also want to test whether or not he can damage through blocks, which as you can see is not the case, and I'm definitely glad that isn't the case with how frustrating Palpatine has been over the last couple of months. Next, I tested the same thing but with the rolling charge, and as you can see it does still deal the damage through the block, but it won't knock the enemy down like it does when they aren't blocking, so it's pretty much the same deal as Han's shoulder charge. Lastly, I just tested the same thing with the cable spin ability, and as you can see again, Vader can actually successfully block it. Now moving on, I wanted to see whether or not the droids could be stunned, which as you can see they definitely can be, and this was probably a pretty obvious one now that I think of it, but since they couldn't be affected by the disruption, I thought it was worth the shot anyway. Now next up, and this one was a pretty big deal, this test was whether or not the droids could deal damage through Grievous's Unrelenting Advance ability. Since it does block blaster fire, and since Vader clearly blocked BB-8's attack with a saber, I assumed this would work, but as you can see it does actually deal damage through the ability. This is a bit of a game changer in HVV since you can pretty much just roll backwards while attacking against Unrelenting Advance, and you should be able to avoid the hits but still be in range to attack, so that is a pretty massive tip for you guys if you do come up against General Grievous. Keeping with General Grievous, I then did a little jousting match between Claw Rush and Rolling Charge to see who'd come out on top. Both BB-8 and Grievous do deal the damage from their abilities, however BB-8 does actually get knocked out of the animation, whereas Grievous just continues on his path, so that might be a helpful thing to know in this situation. Now moving on to just a couple of BB-9E tests, this first one was just to show his smoke screen. I feel like this ability might actually give a false sense of invisibility to some people, but as you can see from the other player's perspective, the smoke barely does anything at all, so just keep in mind that this ability isn't probably going to help as much as you might think it does. Next up, as you can see, when you use that shock spin ability, you will knock enemies who are close, and as you can see, the area of effect is within that white line. What I think a lot of people don't realise yet is that the area of effect doesn't count for the second part of the ability, which is that he overheats the enemy's weapons. As you can see from the second test, you can actually be a lot further away than you might think, and this still overheats the enemy blasters, so just keep that in mind that you don't always have to be close for it to actually have an effect. Now, last but definitely not least, I thought it would be a bit of fun to actually have a race with the two droids to see if either of them are actually faster than the other. This was super hard to do as I pretty much had to hold two controllers and sprint in the same direction at the same time, focusing on both controllers at once to make sure they were headed in the right direction, so the results were never going to be perfect. As you can see, BB-8 did actually get a very slight head start, but the crazy part was that BB-9E actually took off much faster even though he started later, and he was already ahead of BB-8 before too long, eventually getting to the end of the race before BB-8 did. So it could have just been a dodgy test or something, I'm not too sure, but I think they actually have the same speed, yet I think BB-9E actually gets a bit of a boost when he starts sprinting, although just take this one with a grain of salt. But anyway guys, that is going to do it for this episode of Battlefront 2 Mythbusters. Hopefully some of these tests can help you guys out in a few different in-game situations, and if there's anything you think I missed, then make sure to let me know down in the comments, and if there's enough missed tests, then I might even be able to do a follow-up to this video. If you did enjoy the video, then make sure to leave a like down below to help support the channel, and be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 videos or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching, you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!